Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
That's fine, Mr. Kane.
Yes, I rather like myself. Send it right away.
I came to see you.
All right, guys, welcome to Real Classic Film Reviews, and welcome to a classic film review of 1941's Citizen Kane, starring Orson Welles, Joseph Cotten, and Agnes Moorehead. Now, this was co-written and directed by Welles when he was only 26 years old. More on that later. And it's the story of an infamous newspaper tycoon, Charles Foster Kane, who utters a mysterious final word on his deathbed. And a subsequent scramble by the press to uncover its meaning. It's essentially a detective story as William Allen's reporter interviews various figures from Kane's past to put together a picture of the man and one of cinema's most epic rise and fall stories. Now, for over 80 years now, the film has carried the burden of being hailed the greatest film ever made, an impossible standard to live up to, of course. What it is, though, is one of the greatest films of the golden age of Hollywood and one of the most fascinating movies ever made. Now, it single-handedly created and destroyed the 26-year-old architect behind it. Let's take a look. So, Citizen Kane, just the title of the film is synonymous with classic cinema. So it's the story of Charles Foster Kane, a newspaperman who builds a media empire in his eventual downfall, both professionally and personally. And the film's structured in such a way that it's essentially a sequence of flashbacks as William Allen's reporter interviews people from Kane's life. You see his character Jerry Thompson has been made aware, along with the rest of the world via news bulletin, that Kane's final word before his death was the cryptic Rosebud, with the media world now clamouring to find its meaning.
Wait a minute. What were Kane's last words? Do you remember, boys?
Yes, we.
What were the last words he said on Earth? Maybe he told us all about himself on his deathbed.
Yeah, and maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just
All we saw on that screen was a big American.
one of the biggest.
But how is he?
Now, of course, I'm not qualified to tell you what the greatest film ever made is. Nobody is. But why was and why is Citizen Kane held in such high regard? So high, in fact, that it's probably faced the inevitable backlash of success, having been knocked off the #1 spot of Sight and Sound magazine's greatest films poll that it conducts every 10 years. I mean, I think it's still placed third, so it's doing all right. Now, if you're a viewer with more modern sensibilities, then of course a film from 1941 is going to appear incredibly dated, but much like a classic album, this is a treasure trove of innovation from a guy who was only 25 when he signed up to write, direct and star in his first ever movie. Now, you'll find endless writings on Orson Welles. His story is itself the subject of books, TV shows and entire other movies, and as clearly talented and fearless as he was here, it's important to remember Welles wasn't inventing brand new techniques here, but what he does with Citizen Kane is bring them all together in one mind-boggling 2-hour greatest hits compilation. Now, he wants Charles Foster Kane's rise and fall to be epic, and he doesn't let the limitations of the time get in his way, and in fact, that's what makes this film so rewatchable. The story, this find the missing piece to a jigsaw puzzle detective story, is gripping enough and in and of itself would have made the film noteworthy, but on top of that, Orson Welles makes almost every scene feature some kind of interesting element. And of course, you have to give adequate praise to the film's cinematographer, Greg Toland, the sometimes unsung hero of Citizen Kane. Toland's innovative use of the camera makes the 2-hour runtime fly by. Welles, Toland and crew set up impossible shots by using miniatures, special effects, by cutting holes in the floor of sets and sometimes just moving the camera, something that wasn't really that common in the late 30s and early 40s. Now, as a story and a movie, Citizen Kane moves along at a real pace. Now, there are countless decade-spanning biopics and Hollywood epics that seem pretty ponderous in comparison to this. Now check out Orson Welles showing us an entire marriage blossom and collapse via a 3-minute montage at the breakfast table. And an audacious 15-year cut between the words Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year. In closing, may I again remind you that your 25th birthday, which is now approaching, marks your complete independence from the firm of Thatcher and Company.
Now, the plot of the film essentially being broken down into half a dozen interviews lets us look at different sections of Kane's life at various ages and with various wives. And we see how he begins as an idealistic young go-getter with principles and gradually becomes a bitter old man, locked away in his cavernous estate. Now, Welles is brilliant throughout, and here he plays Kane from age 25 right the way through to old age and eventually death, and he's clearly having the time of his life. And what's amazing about the film is that the vast majority of its principal actors were either relatively new to acting in feature films, or like Agnes Moorehead, Ruth Warwick, Everett Sloane and William Allen were here from the Mercury Theatre Group and were making their big screen debut. And I don't really think that there's a duff note among the whole cast for me, especially as many of them are having to play their characters at various ages, which is also a testament to the, at the time, cutting-edge makeup effects that still impress. And the whole thing, of course, just looks stunning. And I've read criticism somewhere of it being too showy, Wells's technical trickery threatening to overwhelm the story, which I don't think is the case. I think Welles takes all the studio's toys and fashions the best possible way to tell the story in each scene. Now, I think this was also Uber conductor Bernard Herrmann's first film score, which is pretty incredible. And the film was edited by Robert Wise, who would go on to direct such films as West Side Story and The Haunting. And of course, it was co-written by Herman J. Mankiewicz. Now, as the Second World War raged across the world and with the USA still about 6 months away from joining in, Kane was released to a whimper, mostly due to the fact that newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, who the film's clearly based on, blocked it to the best of his ability, with cinema chains fearful of showing the film. Now, although it was reviewed well, it slipped quietly away, and it wasn't until the mid-50s when its studio, RKO, sold its library to television and it started to be shown and re-evaluated and appreciated. So this young whippersnapper, Orson Welles, who, remember, had never directed or starred in a film but had experience in radio and theatre, apparently watched John Ford's Stagecoach every night for a month just to prepare. And he and Greg Toland pushed everything they knew and every experiment they wanted to try into this 2-hour movie. Now, of course, 80 plus years after its release and with so much esteem attached to it, for first-time viewers it's probably difficult not to go into the film expecting something incredible. It's only a movie at the end of the day, a brilliant one, no doubt, and one that deserves to be seen and celebrated. Now, Orson Welles amazingly peaked here, in my opinion, although 1958's Touch of Evil does come close. He was plagued by studio interference from this moment on. His very next film, the following year, The Magnificent Ambersons, suffered the studio chopping 50 minutes out of the movie and changing the ending, leaving the film a bit of a mess, really. Here, though, for that brief moment, a Hollywood studio gave a 25-year-old guy a big pile of money and the run of the place, a freedom that birthed a piece of cinematic history, a film to study, discuss and argue over, a movie that's perhaps one of the greatest ever made. Go check it out.
Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or something he lost. Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything. I don't think any word can explain a man's life.